One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I bought a new candle for my office and it smells so good. So good. I know that's a weird thing to start on, but here's what I typically do. Before I sit down and actually hit record, I will go use the restroom, because the last thing that I need is my bladder saying, hey, you better wrap it up because it's going to be an emergency pretty soon. And so I always go to the restroom, and then I always make sure I have my water. And recently, probably in the last 3 or 4 months, I just like to light a candle in my office when I'm working. I think there's something, I've had diffusers before, I've done air sprays, and I've done just different things, but I think there's just something so simple about a candle, and I like calming scents. And so I went to the restroom, I came back in, I forgot my candle, and I was like, oh my gosh, it smells so good in here. But anyway, I know you didn't ask for any of that, but there you go. That's our little behind the scenes for today. But I'm excited to dive into what we're talking about. Oh my gosh. So I love comedy. I wouldn't call myself a student of comedy like to someone if we just met, but in looking back at all the things that I have to say about today's episode, I'm like, oh, I'm 100% a student of comedy from a very, very young age. Very young age. So I'll get into all the backstory and why I love watching comedians, reading comedians, hearing stories about comedians, and yes, even listening to podcasts from comedians, because there are 7 really important things that I've learned about creating content from watching them. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? I don't often do like dedications of episodes. You know how when you open a book, it'll typically say, this is dedicated to my loving wife, my loving husband, my parents, my children, all those things. I have to dedicate today's episode to my dad. 100% to my dad, because it is his love of comedy that lives in my DNA. And thankfully, it is something that it's been passed on to our sons as well. Like, we love a good joke. We love a good comedy movie. We love doing pranks on each other. Like, we just love it. Like, we love to laugh. It's something that growing up, I always remember laughing a lot with my dad, with my brothers, and we just really, really enjoyed it. So I thought I would share a few other ways that I told you earlier, I'm not a student of comedy. Like, I wouldn't introduce myself that way. But whenever I sat down and listed all of the things that I have done in my life, I'm like, oh yeah, I am a student of comedy. I'm a byproduct of just being surrounded by comedy in so many different facets. So it starts from whenever I was a little kid, my dad was obsessed with the tapes. I'm sure it started off on tapes of comedians. So we would listen to people like Jeff Foxworthy, and that for some reason, that's the one that really was solidified. I must have been in like the most prime absorption stage of my brain, because Jeff Foxworthy and all of the "you might be a redneck" jokes were really solidified in car rides to and from school with my dad. So it was either on tapes or CDs. I'm sure at one point we graduated to whenever he finally got a vehicle that had a CD player. Like, this is what we did to and from school. I also grew up watching Saturday Night Live, and I loved Chris Farley and Adam Sandler and David Spade. It's funny because my oldest brother, like, he was absolutely obsessed with Adam Sandler, and he's 5 years older than me. So he was more of the age, like teenage, early 20s he got all the Adam Sandler jokes. I just laughed because my brother was laughing, and I was like, oh, well, he thinks it's funny. I should think it's funny. That's really what happened. But then later on, I ended up inheriting and buying some of my own of Adam Sandler's comedy albums on CDs, and I just loved them so, so much. And then in college, my husband and I actually went to see Robin Williams live whenever I was 7 months pregnant with our oldest son. Now, ladies, I do not recommend going to a comedy show, seeing comedians, period, when you are 7 months pregnant, because having to pee and watch Robin Williams kill it on stage while you're pregnant and wearing a dress, might I add, it was a terrible idea. Terrible idea. Thankfully, I'm here to tell the tale. Nothing awful happened, but it was such an amazing experience to share that with my husband. And since then, we've gone on to we saw Jim Gaffigan, and we've been to a comedy club. We went to Las Vegas for our 9-year anniversary, and we went to a comedy club while we were there. Like, it's everywhere. I love this so, so much. I've read all of Mindy Kaling's hilarious books. Oh my, if you have not read her memoirs, they are so good. I'm going to link to them in the show notes. I'm going to link to all these things in the show notes. So if you want some Saturday Night Live clips, some Jeff Foxworthy, some Tina Fey, that's another, her book, Bossy Pants, literally had me crying. I'm going to link to all this in the show notes. So go to crystalprofit.com/episode 347 for all the things that we're talking about today. If you want to know more about comedy, if you're like, I need some more light, fun things in my life, I'm going to link to them in the show notes, because I got you. I got a ton of stuff that you can go check out. But I mentioned earlier, some of my favorite podcasts are hosted by comedians or people who are actually students of comedy, including Office Ladies. You know, I love Office Ladies. It's still my favorite podcast. And then Smartless, which is another hilarious. Oh my gosh, they have some of the best guests on their show. They're so funny. So funny. I am usually running when I'm listening to podcast or working around the house, like doing something where I'm multitasking. And I will find myself laughing, like laughing out loud. And then I'm like, wait, I'm cracking up. Like I'm talking to someone and I have to look around and make sure no one else sees me. And it's like, what is this crazy lady doing? Of course, I usually have my AirPods in so I could always pretend like I'm on a phone call, but I'm like laugh out loud. So funny. Then the other one is Armchair Expert. I love Dax and Monica on there. I've realized I love the show not just because of Dax, but because of Monica. Monica and I are the same age. And so the things that she says or her experience whenever, like from her childhood, she'll have these pop culture references. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, that was my childhood too. So it's just so fun to listen to all these podcasts. And then I love that now our oldest son is 13. He's about to be 13 as of me recording this, but his new thing that we're doing together is we're rewatching The Office, or he's never watched it. I'm watching it with him. And it's just so much fun. It's our mother-son bonding time. When he gets home from school and the other two aren't home yet, we watch The Office together. So yes, it's a lot. Like I told you, whenever I look at my backstory, and that's just a few things, y'all. I have more comedy stuff that we could dig into, but I have been watching comedians or, just shows about comedy. I've read books. I've just done audiobooks, podcasts, all the things. But it's just so amazing to see these people deliver content and how they do it and what that's like, and watch them do it in a memorable, obviously hilarious, and it's typically a relatable thing that they're talking about. It's either something that you've experienced or someone who has experienced that. And so I want to bring all this backstory of all my knowledge and share with you 7 things that I have really learned about comedians that we can apply to our content. And I'm using the term very generally when it comes to content, because this could be podcasts, it could be YouTube, it could be your emails that you write to your list, it could be what you post on Instagram, like whatever you consider content. I am really looking at the broader picture of how you go about the creation process and what that looks like. So I want you to think about, or I'm sharing with you the things that I think about whenever it comes to comedians that aren't just on the surface level, because obviously they're funny. And I don't want you to feel this pressure. It's like, oh, well, Crystal's telling us I have to be funny all the time. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't think that if funny isn't your style, if you're like, I want to be serious, I talk about a serious topic, there's no humor in it at all, that is okay. Because what I'm talking about and sharing here with you today has really nothing to do with being hilarious all the time. I don't think I'm hilarious all the time, but it's more about how they deliver their content. So the character qualities that I most want to adopt from comedians and where I really study them, we're just going to dive right in. So again, all of these are going to be listed in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 347. So if you're like, I'm riding my car. That's not the right term. I'm driving my car, or I'm running, or I'm doing the dishes, folding laundry, whatever you're doing right now. Don't worry, I wrote them all down for you, so you can just go to the show notes and check them out. Number 1, timing. Timing is everything. Timing is everything when you're a comedian, when you're a podcaster, when you're a YouTuber. So if you only have, let's say, 30 minutes to create a great podcast episode, or 20 minutes to interview someone, or just 5 minutes to make an impression in a YouTube video, you've got to have your timing down. And this comes with practice, okay? So if you are brand new to content and you're like, oh my gosh, an hour-long interview or an hour-long podcast episode sounds so daunting, I want you to think about this maybe even in segments. If you need to think about segmenting out your content, not in a literal way, but more in like how you think about it. Think about your content in 5-minute smaller stories where you're like, okay, for 5 minutes, I want to concentrate on this one piece of the puzzle. And then for 5 minutes, I want to concentrate on this. I know that sounds a little formulaic, and some of you might that sounds kind of boring. It's not if you have a timing problem. And by a timing problem, I mean, you hit record and you're like, okay, I've only been talking for 3 minutes, but this episode's actually supposed to be 15. How am I going to make that work? Because I just told them the 5 steps that they needed to know. And now what else am I supposed to say? Timing is everything, and it's something that you have to work on. And if you are creating content that needs to be planned out, like I'm literally staring at my Asana project for this episode today. I have an individual episode open right now, and I'm staring at my notes because timing is important. I didn't want to forget all the things I had to share with you today. So I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I'm timing everything. And I can look at my notes, and then I can look at my Hindenburg, which is where I'm recording this, and I can see, okay, my timing is really good for right now. But if I were only 4 minutes into this, I'd say, ooh, you need to slow down. Like, you're talking way too fast. People are not able to digest everything that I just said in like 14 minutes in 4 minutes. It's not going to happen. So make sure that you have really thought about your timing and what that looks like for your content. It's going to be different for everybody, but timing is everything. And if you don't have this set limit on your content, I recommend setting it for yourself. And it's okay if you break it. It's okay if you say, I'm going to have 10-minute podcast episodes, but it ends up being 12 minutes one week. And then it's 8 minutes the next week. That is okay. But I highly recommend setting those expectations up front. That way you have something to work with. You have a timeline. You have a deadline for what you're aiming for. Okay, so that's number 1, timing. Number 2, a quick wit. Now, I told you earlier you didn't have to be funny. So if you're like, Crystal, you already said we didn't have to be funny, and now you're talking about being witty, this is actually something I really want to point out because it's not so much about having a quick wit as it is about your natural abilities. Okay, so a quick wit is something I wish to aspire. I have a cousin who is hilarious. He's so funny. Shout out Thad. Every time I see him, like I'm sure his wife is like, he is so annoying to be around all the time because he always has these smart ass comments that are just like, oh my gosh. But I don't see how he does it. He's so on his toes funny because his wit is so good. That is a natural talent. I can promise you, he doesn't sit at home writing jokes, thinking of ways that he can, frustrate his wife or annoy his boss, which just so happens to be my dad, which is even funnier thing that those two work together on a regular basis. But I think about these people in my life. Even my son, our middle son, has this amazing quick wit about him. And I think it's a natural talent. It's something that he is able to do flawlessly. We've encouraged him. We're like, hey, if you want to be a comedian, you definitely have the raw talent to make it happen. But when I think about a comedian, I'm thinking behind the scenes, someone that has a quick wit. I'll bet you the professionals that are out there have used that line, and it was practiced probably 10 times in front of another, quote, audience before it was delivered successfully. And by audience, I don't mean hundreds of people or a stadium full of thousands of fans. I'm talking about maybe they try that on their spouse first, or their mom, or their brother, or their best friend, or their neighbor up the street. The quick wit is something, it's like a muscle. And so if you are like, well, Crystal, this doesn't apply to me, I'm not trying to be funny. Well, what are the things that you want to get better at in your content? And when I say that, I immediately, when I'm thinking of someone who's trying to be a more serious tone in their content, they don't want to be super, super serious, but they want to have a more serious tone to everything they're doing. What if your skill that you need to get better at is talking very matter-of-factly, very slowly, or maybe even taking long pauses?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Ooh, do you see what I just did there? Like, I didn't edit in that long pause. Like, that was very deliberate and something that myself, if I were to add that to the tone of my content, which would be very difficult for me, that's not my natural style. It's not my natural style to talk like I use that. I reserve that for serious conversations that I have to have that need that tone. So think about what are some of the characteristics that you want to adopt from other mentors that you have or other podcasters or content creators. You're like, I really want more of that. You may need to practice it. So that's really where all this, like, it boils down to. If there's a characteristic that you see, you're going to have to practice it. And for me, it's a quick wit. I want to have a better quick wit. I think it's so funny whenever you can be just like on your toes, hilarious. I'm working on it. Okay. I'm working on it in real time. Number 3, I love how comedians use the simplest, most mundane experiences of our lives and they make them meaningful and they're funny and relatable because the best comedians can bring out the most mundane experiences in everyday life and make them freaking hilarious. Freaking hilarious. I actually brought 3 examples to the table because, and like I said, I could come up with hundreds of examples of this, but these were the 3 that sprang to mind when I was planning today's episode. And these are all from Netflix specials. Okay. So I'm going to link to all of these. Like if you have a Netflix account, you need to go watch these if you have not seen them. The first one is Dana Carvey. Yes, from Wayne's World, that same Dana Carvey. He has a Netflix special where he's talking about his experience taking his teenage sons to Rome and them like not having it, being completely over it. I think he had envisioned in his mind that this was going to be like a once in a lifetime opportunity for them. And they were going to be so amazed and in awe, like seeing the Colosseum and all these things. And their sons are so over it. I will not give away the catchphrase that his sons used over and over again, or his imitation of them over and over again, but it is a staple in our family. My sister-in-law used it a lot repeatedly because she is also a fan of comedy. And I love it when we have these inside jokes that are from comedy specials that we've watched together. But that's what I'm saying. Like he was stuck in Rome with his teenage sons and he was supposed to be enjoying this family vacation and all they could do was complain and moan about how they were just over it and they couldn't take it. But it was so funny because it was relatable. It was relatable. It was hilarious. It was just the irony of it was kind of like a Chevy Chase, like vacation of a National Lampoon's experience. And it just really brought it home for me because it was so simple. It was an effortless story because we've experienced that on some level ourselves or with our own kids. The second one was I've never experienced this because I am a woman, but I found it so funny. So funny. So Adam Sandler, he's another one. You got to go watch his Netflix special. He's talking about a grown man peeing in the shower. Which also has a hilarious song that goes along with it. I'm not going to spoil it for those of you that want to watch his special, but who would have thought talking about someone peeing in the shower would be so hilarious? But it's this, like I said, this simple experience that you're just like, what? What are you even talking about? And then the last one is Eliza Schlesinger. Oh my gosh, y'all. She's so funny. And again, I think I find her so funny because she's very close to my age. I think she's a few years older than me, but the things that she talks about, it's just so hilarious. So she talks about like the ups and downs of her dating life that leave you thinking like, is this real? Is this a real story? Or did she totally make this up? Is this a bit that she's playing? And you really never know, but it's just, her stories kill me every single time. They're so, so funny. So bringing it back to using simple experiences from your life and make them have meaning and be funny, be relatable, be whatever it is that your audience needs you to be to make that connection. But even earlier, we could go back to the very top of this episode today. I shared with you about a new candle that I got from my office because it's a really simple thing in my life. But I was like, maybe somebody can relate to that. Having a good smelling office, having a candle that just, kind of gets them in the zone and it, helps them be more focused or whatever it is when they're creating their content. So those simple stories, use them and use them often. All right, that's number 3. Number 4, use a great story in many different ways. So once you have a story, or in a comedian sense, you have part of your bit, right? You know the skills that, it's there. It's in your memory. It is embedded in who you are if you use it repeatedly because it's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's why you will hear me when I go onto other people's podcasts and they ask me, well, tell us about yourself, or how did you start your podcast? How did you start this? I typically will share the same story. I'm like, well, I was in corporate, then I was a stay-at-home mom who didn't really know what I was doing, and then I wasn't totally fulfilled doing that, so I started writing, and then I started blogging unsuccessfully, and then this works every time because people can relate to that. 1, it's a true story. It is my truth. But 2, it's also someone that whether they've experienced that themselves, or they know someone who was a stay-at-home mom, or their best friend is a stay-at-home mom, or even their mom was a stay-at-home mom, they have some sort of relational experience to what I went through. But I use that story on podcast episodes. I use it in live streams. I've used it in emails. I've used it on content I've created on Instagram. So if you listen to one person or a comedian on multiple podcasts, there's a chance that you're going to hear them retell the same story in some kind of capacity across multiple stages. So there is power in having really great stories that you can use in multiple ways. Okay. Oh my gosh, y'all, we're rounding the corner here. We're more than halfway through at this point because we are on to number 5. And that is testing ideas in front of multiple audiences. Now, if you don't know this about stand-up comedians, they will typically go and do open mic nights. Now, it could be totally different since the pandemic and lots of bars shut down and they reopen. Hopefully, a lot of them have reopened so that comedians would have a place to practice. But the idea, I just feel that comedians are some of the original inventors of repurposing content because Jerry Seinfeld, okay, he's a great example. He would write out, and maybe he still does this to today, I don't know, but he would write a joke a day on a legal pad and use it. So maybe he would just tell one of his co-writers, or he would tell someone on his cast, or he would tell a friend or family member, but he was writing a joke every single day. And then he'd test it on someone. So you have to see if the idea that you have in your head will get the reaction you think, or you hope it will, or it's going to bomb. Now, this is what's cool about repurposing content across multiple platforms, because I know if I talk about something on this podcast and it takes off, I immediately am like, that needs to be a YouTube video, or I need to talk about that more on a live stream, or that needs to become a 7-part carousel on an Instagram. There's so many different ways that you can repurpose it, but testing your ideas, it's the same thing. Whenever a YouTube video starts getting more views, I look at it and I say, have I created another video about that, or what other videos can I use and spin off to create more content like this? So testing ideas in front of multiple audiences is number 5, and I think it's a really, really important one. Last 2, are you ready? Number 6, bringing home the story. Maybe I should have made this number 7, and that would have been like my little quick wit thing, right? Like bringing it on home. But y'all, a good punchline will get me every time. Like you get a standing ovation of me in my bedroom, like watching a Netflix special. It's over and that last punchline is given and they're like, thank you. And they walk off stage and I'm still standing up and clapping because I'm like, yes, that was so good. That was so hilarious. But the person that I think of most that does this so well is Jim Gaffigan. Y'all, I just love Jim Gaffigan. He, and the way that he talks about his children, because he has 5 kids. They live in a New York walk-up. I don't know if they are all still home because I know his older kids may be getting to that like going to college age. So I don't know if they're all still living in this New York apartment. But it's so amazing. He does such a good job at bringing the story home, hitting that punchline. And when we saw him it was last year here in the Houston area, he will start like his show and he drops an Easter egg like right at the beginning. If you don't know what that is, have you ever heard this term where people are like, oh, that's an Easter egg? I first learned it from my kids watching YouTube videos and they're like, oh, that's an Easter egg for later. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, well, if you watch these Disney movies, you'll see that there's like a slight nod to this other Disney movie and they're all like intertwined somehow. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I didn't know what that was, but that's what an Easter egg is. But Jim just does, listen to me, I'm talking about Jim, like we're best friends or something. Jim Gaffigan will drop an Easter egg at the very beginning of his show. And you're like, what is he even talking about? Like, has he lost his mind? I have no idea what that sentence that he just said relates to anything. But inevitably, he brings it home at the end every single time. Every single time. It is amazing. It's what I will salivate over whenever it comes to comedy. I'm just like, oh my, like, yes, you get a standing ovation for me. If you can bring it on home and have everything make sense. So it's kind of like, if I were to use, and it's funny because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, I should have thought about a way to tie in the candle story from the beginning and tie it in now. I mean, we're talking about it again, apparently, because I'm obsessed with this candle that I have. But it's like, if I were to say something about that and bring it into the story right now as we're getting closer to the end, and then just having like a boom, like blow your mind experience right at the end. That's what I'm talking about, bringing it home. So if you're creating your content and your podcast episodes and you're like, I really want this part to be the big takeaway, consider adding that towards the end of your content so you can have that standing ovation moment. So you can have that like, oh, that was so, so good. And those are the times, sometimes I'll say, let me repeat that. And I'll say it again. I will have that in my notes, like bolded or italicized or all caps because it's really important. And I usually bring that down to the end of my content when I'm delivering it. So bring it on home, bring your story home, land the plane, but you want to make sure that you finish your really awesome story with something that people are going to remember. And then the last thing, number 7, knowing how to make an entrance and end on a high note. So I guess we are coming back full circle because today, y'all, I just talked about the candle story like 7 times now. But that was my entrance for today. And that's not in my outline. I didn't write that down to say, oh, let me make a note that I really need to talk about my candle. I talked about that today because I want to be relatable. I want to kind of have an icebreaker at the very beginning that helps us settle into the content, settle into the podcast. Maybe you're still lacing up your shoes whenever we first started and you're like, what the heck is she talking about a candle? What is this? Or you're driving and you're just getting out of your neighborhood and you're like, okay, we're buckle up. Like this is going to be, it's going to be one of those episodes while you're driving down the road. Make a strong entrance. Don't just turn on the mic and say, okay, I have 4 things to share with you today. Number 1, that maybe you need to do that in other types of content, but I'm going to highly encourage you to have a hook at the beginning. Have something where you're not just, hi, I'm Crystal, and today this is a podcast, number 1, and we're just going to jump in. Make somewhat of an entrance. Make an effort to break the ice with your audience so that they stay more engaged and they're not like, gosh, I really wish this was just a blog post and I didn't have to listen to her ramble on. And maybe some of your content needs to be a blog post instead of a podcast episode. I'm okay with that. I know there's some things that I could care less about talking about, but people ask me about, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll make that a YouTube video, but I'm gonna make it really short because I don't really like to talk about it. But making an entrance and ending on a high note. So what I like to do to end on a high note is to do a recap. It's to share something that I think would be very helpful for those of you that maybe I know you're struggling with this identity of trying to figure out your content. And that's what today's episode is all about. Like, what is your content going to be moving forward, moving into the next quarter of 2022? What do things look like? Are you going to be doing some reflection? I'm making a lot of inferences and assumptions about what you need right now if you're listening to this in real time when it airs. And I'm trying to help you understand that you can take these parts of your life, like who would have thought I'd be sitting here educating you on my own comedy experience and the reasons why I'm a student of comedy, but I bring it all up because I think it's important. I think it's awesome that you can take experiences in your own life and use those in your content. It's how I'm able to stand out. And I get the question all the time when I'm on podcast episodes, I'm on live streams. I get questions from people is, how do I stand out? Well, you do it by sharing your own stories, sharing your own experiences. I don't know that there's other podcast and content strategists out there that are talking about listening to Jeff Foxworthy in their dad's plumbing truck on the way to the donut shop before school. I just don't know that that's a thing. I don't know that that's happening. So bring in your own experience, bring in your own life to help people understand you better and therefore make your content better. Oh, I love today's episode. This was so much fun. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You didn't click it off about like 2 seconds in and you're like, I could care less about comedy. I hope that even if you're not a student of comedy, you stuck around until the end because this was the highlight of my week. It was so much fun. Go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 347 to check out everything we talked about here today. But that's all I have for you. Y'all, that was it. Do you want a quick recap? Okay, let's see. Let's go back to the beginning. Number 1, timing. Number 2, quick wit or whatever other characteristic you want to work on or practice on. It's got to happen. Number 3, use those simple life experiences and make them have meaning. So important. Number 4, use a great story in many different ways. Number 5, test your ideas on multiple audiences. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to tell your friend, tell your husband, your wife. Like, just don't be afraid to share it in front of multiple audiences. Number 6, bring home the story. Have that punchline. Number 7, making an entrance and ending on a high note. And again, go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 347. But real fast, I was going to say about the high note, since we're here, right? We're at the end of this piece of content. I love the phrase, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. That is a high note for me. That is something that hits me at my core every time I say it, even though at this point, I have literally said that phrase thousands of times. It still is something that is a high note for me because it hits me personally. Even if it doesn't hit you personally every single time, I hope that that message reverberates in your subconscious when you go to try something new, whether it's implementing any of the things we talked about here today, or launching your podcast, or getting your YouTube channel started, like whatever. I hope that that message really sits with you. And I bet, I'm going to call a few of you out here. I bet that whenever I say it at the end, you mouth the words with me. Don't you? Don't you? I know you. I see you, because I do the same to the podcast that I listen to on a regular basis and that I love. And they have their own little catchphrase and thing that they say at the very end of each episode. I'm not judging you for it. I love it. In fact, it's just so much fun to think about. But that is all I have for you today. So if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you listen to this podcast. Take a screenshot and share it on Instagram. Tag me, tell me what your favorite thing was about this episode, maybe the craziest comedian that you love to follow, or the most hilarious book that you've read. I always love good audiobook and paperback book recommendations because they're everything. They're so much fun. But that's all I have for you today. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.